What if I told you that the person who once convinced themselves they had to let you go is now fighting a battle no one else can see? What if, in the silence between you, something unexpected began to change? While you were learning to live without them, they were slowly realizing that walking away did not bring the peace they expected. Instead, it left behind questions they could no longer ignore. Most people believe love ends the moment two people separate. But what if separation is not always the end? What if it is the moment when buried emotions finally rise to the surface? There are truths the heart refuses to reveal, while everything feels familiar. Sometimes it takes distance, silence, and the fear of permanent loss for someone to recognize what they almost threw away. Today's message is not about chasing someone who left. It is not about false promises or wishful thinking. It is about understanding the hidden psychological journey that unfolds when fear begins to lose its grip and emotional truth finally takes its place. Stay with me until the very end, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you understand love, separation, and the possibility of genuine transformation. The answers you've been searching for may not be where you took. They may already be unfolding within the silence itself. There is a moment in human experience that cannot be understood through logic alone. The moment when distance reveals love more clearly than closeness ever did. When two people are constantly present in each other's lives, the mind often becomes accustomed to their existence. What once felt extraordinary slowly begins to feel ordinary. Their messages become expected, their presence becomes familiar, and the emotional comfort they provide is treated as something that will always be there. This is not because the connection lacks value, but because the human psyche has a tendency to stop noticing what it believes it cannot lose. Then distance enters. Distance changes perception. It removes the constant reassurance that the other person will be available tomorrow. Suddenly the emotional landscape shifts. The silence where their voice used to be becomes noticeable. The routines that once included them begin to feel incomplete. Small details that were previously ignored start returning to awareness with surprising intensity. The way they listened, the way they understood certain things without explanation, the sense of safety that existed simply because they were near. This awakening is often misunderstood. People think they miss the person only because they are absent. But true emotional awakening goes much deeper than temporary longing. It is the realization that the other person occupied a meaningful psychological space within them. Their presence was not merely a habit, it had become part of the individual's inner world. When that presence disappears, the psyche is forced to confront the emptiness left behind. What makes this process powerful is that distance removes distraction. While someone is present, unresolved fears, pride, and emotional defenses can remain hidden. A person may convince themselves that they need freedom, independence, or separation. Yet once the external noise fades, they are left alone with their own thoughts. And thoughts that were once pushed away begin to surface. Memories become clearer. Emotions become harder to deny. The heart often awakens after distance because separation creates contrast. We rarely understand the value of light until we experience darkness. In the same way, we rarely understand the depth of a connection until we experience life without it. The absence acts like a mirror, reflecting back everything that was previously overlooked. This is why some people change their minds after walking away. They do not suddenly create new feelings. Rather, they become conscious of feelings that were already there. The distance strips away assumptions. It reveals whether the connection was built on convenience or genuine emotional significance. Convenience disappears quickly when circumstances change. Genuine significance remains present, even in silence. There is also a deeper psychological truth involved. Human beings often recognize emotional security only after it is removed. When someone consistently offers understanding, acceptance, and emotional warmth, the nervous system begins to treat those experiences as normal. Only when they vanish does the person realize how much stability they were receiving. What felt ordinary was actually a source of profound inner balance. Distance, therefore, is not always the end of love. Sometimes it is the moment love becomes visible. It forces awareness. It interrupts emotional complacency. It exposes what the soul had quietly attached itself to long before the conscious mind was ready to admit it. Real transformation does not happen when life is comfortable. It begins when a person is forced to confront the parts of themselves they have avoided for years. Many people believe relationships end because love disappears, but often it is unresolved fear, emotional immaturity, or unhealed wounds that push two people apart. The connection itself may still exist, yet it becomes buried beneath defensive habits, misunderstandings, and the desire to protect oneself from pain. When separation occurs, both individuals are given something they may never have chosen, willingly but desperately needed: the opportunity to face themselves without depending on the relationship to define who they are. At first, this process can feel uncomfortable. Without the other person's presence, there are fewer distractions from the emotions that have been hidden beneath everyday life. The mind begins replaying conversations, remembering missed opportunities, and questioning decisions that once seemed certain. Instead of blaming the other person, some individuals slowly begin to recognize the patterns they carried into the relationship. They notice how pride kept them silent when honesty was needed, how fear made them withdraw instead of expressing vulnerability, or how insecurity caused them to misinterpret love as control or rejection. This awareness is not a sign of weakness. It is the beginning of genuine emotional growth. Transformation also changes the way people see love itself. Before growth, love is often viewed as something that should constantly provide happiness, reassurance, and certainty. When difficulties appear, many assume the relationship is failing. After emotional growth, they begin to understand that love is not the absence of challenges, but the willingness to face them with patience, understanding, and mutual respect. They stop expecting another person to heal every insecurity and instead accept responsibility for their own emotional well-being. This shift creates healthier relationships because affection is no longer driven by need alone, but by conscious choice. During this period of change, people often develop a deeper sense of empathy. Experiences that once seemed personal begin to make more sense from another perspective. They realize the other person was also carrying invisible fears, disappointments, and emotional struggles. Instead of seeing only mistakes, they begin to understand the pain behind those mistakes. Compassion replaces judgment, making it easier to forgive, communicate honestly, and appreciate the complexity of another human being. This does not mean ignoring harmful behavior, but it encourages seeing the full picture rather than reacting only to the surface. Growth also reshapes personal identity. A person who once relied on constant validation may learn confidence through solitude. Someone who feared abandonment may discover that their worth does not depend on another person's choices. Another who avoided difficult conversations may gradually become capable of speaking openly and listening without defensiveness. These changes are rarely dramatic or immediate. They are built through countless moments of reflection, difficult decisions, and the courage to respond differently than before. As this inner transformation continues, the connection itself begins to feel different, even if the two people have not spoken for a long time. The desire to control, chase, or prove oneself gradually fades. In its place grows a quieter, more stable form of affection that is rooted in respect rather than fear. Love becomes less about possession and more about understanding. It is no longer fueled by anxiety over losing someone, but by appreciation for who they truly are. When two people experience this kind of personal evolution, the possibility of reconnection carries a completely different energy. Old arguments lose their power because the individuals involved are no longer the same people who created them. The lessons learned through separation become the foundation for healthier communication, greater emotional resilience, and a deeper appreciation of the bond they once took for granted. The relationship, if it returns, is no longer built on the fragile hopes of the past, but on the strength that comes from two people who have learned to grow before asking love to grow within them. Silence has a unique way of revealing emotions that constant conversation often keeps hidden. When two people are regularly communicating, their attention is occupied by daily events, routines, expectations, and immediate reactions. Messages are exchanged, questions are answered, and life continues moving forward without much time for deep reflection. In this constant flow, genuine feelings can remain buried beneath habit. A person may believe they understand their emotions simply because they are always interacting with the other person. Yet true emotional clarity often appears only when those interactions suddenly stop. The absence of communication creates a space that the mind naturally tries to fill. Without new conversations to focus on, memories begin to surface. Moments that once seemed ordinary are remembered with surprising detail. A simple smile, a familiar laugh, or a thoughtful gesture suddenly carries emotional weight that was never fully appreciated in the moment. The mind is no longer distracted by what is happening today, so it begins examining what happened yesterday. In doing so, it uncovers feelings that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface. Many people mistake silence for emotional distance. But silence does not always mean the heart has stopped speaking. Often, it is during quiet periods that the inner voice becomes impossible to ignore. Without constant external noise, a person begins listening to thoughts they have avoided for a long time. They may realize that their anger was hiding disappointment, their pride was covering fear, or their apparent indifference was protecting them from vulnerability. These realizations rarely happen during heated conversations because strong emotions tend to focus on defending one's position rather than understanding one's heart. Silence also removes the comfort of immediate reassurance. When someone is always available, it is easy to assume they will continue to be there. There is little urgency to examine what they truly mean because their presence feels guaranteed. Once communication fades, certainty disappears. The mind begins asking questions it never considered before. What did this person actually bring into my life? Why does their absence feel so noticeable? Why do certain memories keep returning, even when I try to move forward? These questions gradually uncover emotional truths that routine interactions had concealed. This process becomes even more powerful because the imagination begins filling the empty for the spaces left by silence. Without knowing what the other person is thinking or doing, the mind reflects on unfinished conversations, unspoken words, and missed opportunities. Regret often grows in these quiet moments, not because silence creates new emotions, but because it exposes emotions that were never fully acknowledged. A person may suddenly recognize how many chances they had to express appreciation, offer kindness, or speak honestly but allowed fear or pride to keep them silent instead. There is another important psychological aspect to silence. Human beings naturally seek meaning, and when external information disappears, the mind turns inward. Instead of focusing on another person's actions, it begins examining personal behavior. This self-reflection can reveal recurring emotional patterns that were previously unnoticed. Someone may recognize how often they withdrew during conflict, avoided difficult conversations, or expected the other person to understand feelings that were never expressed. These insights become possible because silence slows the pace of emotional reactions and creates room for honest observation. Silence can also dissolve illusions. During active communication, assumptions and expectations often shape how people interpret each other's words. When communication stops, those assumptions lose their influence. What remains is the emotional impression the relationship truly left behind. If the connection was shallow, silence gradually weakens the attachment. If the connection carried genuine emotional depth, silence often strengthens awareness of its significance. The absence becomes a mirror, reflecting what the heart valued all along. For many people, this quiet period becomes the first time they truly understand the difference between temporary attraction and lasting emotional connection. Attraction is often sustained by excitement, novelty, and constant interaction. Deep connection survives even when there are no messages, no phone calls, and no daily reminders. The feeling remains because it has become part of the inner emotional world rather than something dependent on external contact. In this way, silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes the place where hidden feelings rise into full awareness, allowing the heart to recognize truths that constant noise never allowed it to see. Fear has a powerful influence over human decisions, especially in matters of love. In the beginning of many meaningful relationships, the greatest fear is often vulnerability. Opening your heart to another person means accepting uncertainty. It means allowing someone to see your strengths as well as your weaknesses, your confidence alongside your insecurities. For many people, this emotional exposure feels dangerous. They worry about rejection, disappointment, betrayal, or losing control over their own emotions. Because of these fears, they sometimes create distance, avoid commitment, or convince themselves that walking away is the safest choice. At first, this decision can feel like relief. By stepping away from the relationship, they believe they have protected themselves from future pain. The mind creates comforting explanations, insisting that independence is easier than emotional risk. They may focus on the flaws of the relationship, exaggerate small disagreements, or distract themselves with work, hobbies, or new experiences. These strategies provide temporary comfort because they reduce the immediate pressure of facing vulnerable emotions. Yet emotional truth rarely disappears simply because it has been ignored. As time passes, something begins to change. The fear that once centered on getting hurt slowly transforms into a different kind of fear. Instead of worrying about the pain of staying, they begin worrying about the consequences of leaving. The possibility that the other person may truly move on becomes real. The familiar presence they once assumed would always be there is no longer guaranteed. This realization creates a profound emotional shift because the mind starts comparing two different kinds of pain, the pain of vulnerability and the pain of permanent loss. This comparison often reveals something unexpected. The fear of opening the heart, which once seemed overwhelming, begins to appear smaller than the fear of never having another chance. Regret starts replacing avoidance. Memories that were once pushed aside return with greater emotional intensity. They remember conversations that brought comfort, quiet moments that felt peaceful, and acts of kindness that seemed ordinary at the time, but now appear deeply meaningful. These memories are no longer viewed through the lens of fear, but through the lens of appreciation. The human mind naturally adapts to what is consistently available. When someone is always present, their importance can fade into the background of daily life. Their support, understanding, and affection become familiar, almost expected. Only when that presence disappears does the emotional value become fully visible. This change in perspective often explains why people suddenly recognize the significance of someone they once believed they could easily let go. The absence creates emotional clarity that constant presence sometimes hides. Another important aspect of this transformation is the gradual weakening of pride. Pride often encourages emotional distance because admitting love requires admitting need, vulnerability, and dependence on another person's presence. While fear and pride work together, they convince a person that remaining emotionally guarded is a sign of strength. Over time, however, loneliness has a way of challenging these beliefs. The quiet moments become difficult to ignore. The desire to protect one's ego begins to feel less important than the desire to reconnect with someone who brought genuine emotional meaning into life. This shift also changes how people interpret courage. In the past, courage may have seemed like walking away, refusing to depend on anyone, or pretending that emotions did not matter. After deeper reflection, courage takes on a completely different meaning. It becomes the willingness to admit mistakes, express feelings honestly, apologize when necessary, and accept the possibility of rejection in exchange for authenticity. The person realizes that true strength is not found in emotional distance, but in the ability to remain open despite uncertainty. As fear of loss grows stronger, priorities begin to change. Small disagreements lose their importance because the larger reality becomes impossible to fragile. Winning arguments no longer feels satisfying if it means losing the relationship itself. The need to be right gives way to the desire to understand. Defensive reactions become opportunities for honest conversation. Instead of asking, "How can I protect myself?" the heart quietly begins asking, "How can I protect what truly matters?" This change reflects a deeper emotional maturity, where preserving a meaningful connection becomes more valuable than preserving pride or avoiding discomfort. When someone reaches this point, their actions often become more intentional. They no longer speak from impulse or fear, but from a clearer understanding of what they are at risk of losing. The relationship is no longer viewed as something that can be replaced easily. It becomes recognized as a rare connection that shaped their inner world in ways they did not fully appreciate until they stood on the edge of losing it forever. Some human connections leave an impression that extends far beyond ordinary memory. Long after conversations have ended and physical distance has grown, certain people continue to influence the way we think, feel, and understand ourselves. This is not because every relationship is destined to last forever, but because some bonds become deeply woven into our inner psychological world. They shape our emotions, challenge our beliefs, and become part of the personal story we carry within us. Even when life moves in different directions, the impact of that connection can remain alive in subtle and unexpected ways. When two people share experiences filled with genuine trust, vulnerability, and emotional honesty, the mind does not simply erase those moments because time has passed. Instead, those experiences become part of memory in a much deeper sense than ordinary events. They influence future decisions, affect emotional responses, and even change the standards by which a person measures other relationships. A meaningful connection leaves behind more than memories. It leaves behind lessons, emotional patterns, and a greater understanding of what it feels like to be truly seen and accepted. This continuing influence is often misunderstood. People sometimes believe that thinking about someone after a long time automatically means they are meant to return. In reality, recurring thoughts can arise for many reasons. They may reflect unresolved emotions, gratitude for personal growth, unfinished conversations, or the lasting impact of a significant chapter in life. The persistence of these thoughts does not always predict the future, but it does reveal that the relationship occupied an important place in a person's emotional development. There are quiet moments when this influence becomes especially noticeable. A familiar song, a particular place, or even a simple phrase can suddenly awaken emotions that seemed forgotten. These experiences demonstrate how deeply the human mind connects feelings with meaningful relationships. The emotional response is not always about wishing to relive the past. Sometimes it is simply the recognition that another person helped shape who we became. Their presence altered our perspective, encouraged growth, or revealed strengths and vulnerabilities we had never fully understood before. As people mature, they often revisit these inner experiences with greater wisdom. What once felt like pain may later be recognized as an important lesson. What once seemed like rejection may reveal hidden opportunities for personal transformation. This shift in perspective allows the connection to continue influencing life in positive ways, even without ongoing contact. The relationship becomes part of an inner dialogue that encourages greater compassion, emotional awareness, and understanding of future connections. Another important aspect of a lasting bond is its ability to challenge the illusions people create about themselves. A deeply meaningful relationship often reflects qualities that remain hidden in everyday life. It may expose fears of abandonment, difficulties with trust, or the desire to feel accepted without conditions. Once these qualities have been revealed, they cannot easily be forgotten. Even after separation, the individual continues reflecting on these discoveries, gradually learning more about their own emotional nature. In this way, the connection keeps influencing personal growth long after the relationship itself has changed. This lasting influence also affects how people approach future relationships. Someone who has experienced genuine emotional safety may become less willing to settle for superficial connections. They begin seeking authenticity rather than appearances, mutual respect rather than temporary excitement, and honest communication rather than emotional games. The previous bond becomes an internal reference point, not because it must be recreated exactly, but because it demonstrated what meaningful connection feels like. That experience quietly shapes expectations, values, and choices moving forward. There is also a profound difference between attachment and lasting emotional significance. Attachment often depends on constant reassurance and external contact. When communication ends, attachment gradually weakens because it relies heavily on immediate interaction. Lasting emotional significance is different. It remains present because it has become part of a person's identity and understanding of life. The influence continues, not through daily communication, but through the values, insights, and emotional maturity that developed because of the relationship. Over time, many people come to realize that some connections continue living within them, not as unfinished stories, but as enduring sources of wisdom. The relationship may have changed form, circumstances may have shifted, and life may have taken unexpected paths, yet the emotional imprint remains. It quietly influences decisions, deepens self-awareness, and reminds the individual of the rare moments when another person helped them discover parts of themselves they might never have found alone. As you reflect on everything shared today, remember this: the most meaningful connections are not defined by how perfectly they begin, but by how deeply they transform the people involved. Sometimes distance is not the end of a story. It is the space where truth becomes impossible to ignore. Hearts often awaken after silence. Growth replaces fear. Hidden emotions rise to the surface, and what once seemed lost begins to reveal its true value. If someone has genuinely changed their mind, their transformation will be reflected not only in their words, but in their actions, their consistency, and their willingness to protect the connection they once risked losing. And if you have also grown through the journey, you are no longer standing where you once were. You have become wiser, stronger, and more emotionally aware than before. Whether your paths cross again or continue in different directions, never let fear stop you from becoming the best version of yourself. Real love is not built on chasing, controlling, or convincing. It is built on honesty, emotional maturity, mutual respect, and the courage to choose understanding over pride. Trust your journey, trust your growth, and above all, trust that every experience has shaped you into someone capable of giving and receiving a deeper kind of love than you once imagined. Thank you for spending your time here today. If this message resonated with you, may it inspire hope, self-reflection, and inner peace as you continue your journey. I sincerely wish you strength in difficult moments, wisdom in every decision, and the courage to follow your heart with clarity and confidence. Good luck on your path, and may your future be filled with meaningful connections, personal growth, and the love that helps you become the person you are meant to be. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of yourself and keep moving forward.